Continuing on with the male reproductive system, the primary sex glands in the male are going to be the testes, which are found here, and accessory glands or structures are going to be a lot of ducts that transmit seminal fluid and sperm, tubes, and also some other glands. So starting with the testes, they're held in a sac called the scrotum, and there's actually a muscle in the scrotum called the dartos muscle. And this has a lot to do with temperature regulation. So for optimal sperm production, the sperm need to be at a temperature that's slightly lower than body temperature, so they're outside the body. And depending on what temperature the external temperature is, the dartos muscle could pull the testes closer to the body or let them be further away. The testes produce sperm, which are the male gamete, and testosterone, which is a hormone that we learned about in the endocrine system, very important in protein synthesis. So looking inside the testes, so there's a bunch of tubes in there. So if you look here, you just see a bunch of little tubes in here. These are called seminiferous tubules, and that's where sperm are actually going to be produced. They're in these little areas called lobules of the testes. And between so if we look kind of through a microscope, you can kind of see how it's a bunch of tubes, and you'll see this when we look at in the lab at some of the microscope pictures of testes. They look like little tubes, like cross sections of tubes, and in between those tubes you have these interstitial cells. They're called Leydig cells, sometimes called interstitial cells of Leydig, but they're not in the tubes, they're between, and they produce testosterone. So the Leydig cells produce the testosterone. The Sertoli cells are actually in the tubes, and they are actually the cells that produce sperm. So other important structures around the testes, there's a muscle called the cremaster muscle, which is labeled right here. Also, as we were talking about on the previous slide, can elevate or lower the testes to help maintain optimal temperature for sperm production. And then all of this is called the spermatic cord. And that includes all these blood vessels, arterioles, venules, nerves, and then something called the vas deferens that you're going to see is actually going to transmit the sperm as it makes its way out. So if we look at a sperm, like we said, they're produced in seminiferous tubules. And similar to the oocytes, they go through different stages. And so spermatogonia are like the very immature stem cells, and then they go through all these phases, and what you end up with in the end is a mature sperm cell, which is called a spermatozoa. And if you look at the parts of a given sperm cell, so there's a head region that has an acrosome cap on it. So acrosome is the head. It's a protein cap, and it has enzymes that allow it to penetrate the oocyte during fertilization. Then there's neck region, sometimes called the midpiece, and then the tail is the big flagellum that we learned about early in the semester. So this actually allows the sperm to move and basically serves as a motor for the sperm to move through fluid. So all the ducts associated with sperm getting out, it's just a series of ducts. So if you want to envision this, like here's your seminiferous tubules, this is where sperm is produced in these tubes. After that, it's going to go through these tubes here called the ret testes. After that, it's going to go through these little tubes. These are called efferent ductules. Then the sperm are going to make its way through this big structure right here. This is called the epididymis. And there's different regions to it, head, body, tail. And the sperm undergoes some modification as it goes through the epididymis. After the epididymis, the sperm is going to go into this big tube called the vas deferens, sometimes called the ductus deferens, but we're going to call it vas deferens. And so this is going to take the sperm through the spermatic cord and eventually into the urethra. So you can't see these structures in the picture, but you'll see them on the next slide. After the vas deferens goes through the spermatic cord, it's going to go through an expanded region called the ampulla, and then it's going to merge with some other secretory structures called the seminal vesicles. And when the ampulla merges with these seminal vesicles, you get the formation of something called the ejaculatory duct. And so this is what we were getting at. So here's your vas deferens. It goes through an expanded region called the ampulla. where it's going to merge with this structure called the seminal vesicle, and you're going to get the formation of something called the ejaculatory duct, and this is on both sides. So ejaculatory duct is right here. That's going to lead us into the urethra, which is going to carry the sperm the rest of the way out. Okay, if we look at the urethra, there's 3 parts to it, very similar to what we saw with the urinary system. So we have the prostatic urethra, goes through the prostate gland, which is right here. The membranous urethra, which goes through this little strip right here, where you have these glands called bulbourethral glands. We'll get back to those in a second. And then the part that goes, part of the urethra that goes through the penis is called a penile or spongy urethra. So the accessory glands that help form this seminal fluid that comes out during ejaculation is, there's 3 big players here. They have seminal vesicles, which we talked about right here. So seminal vesicles, they secrete an alkaline fluid or a basic fluid. We have the prostate gland, which also secretes some fluid that's loaded with proteins. And then we have these little glands right here called bulbourethral glands, sometimes known as Cowper's glands. And these also secrete mucus. All right, if we do a cross-section of the penis and take a look, we can see the erectile bodies of the penis. So we have 2 big erectile bodies. So, well, the first 2 are going to be called corpus cavernosum. There's 2, so corpus cavernosa here and here. Then we have the corpus spongiosum, which is here. Now, all of these are they're called erectile bodies, but they're basically blood vessels. They fill with blood. And so it's the filling of these vessels with blood, or filling of these erectile bodies with blood, that actually makes the penis erect. And so the blood fills these venous spaces, making the penis erect. One last thing, this is under control of the autonomic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for relaxing those venous spaces and allowing blood to fill up and make the penis erect.